IIT Madras संस्कृतसमितेः आश्रये मुद्राराक्षसमितिस्य प्रवचनानि प्रचलन्ति। पञ्चमाङ्के वयं भवामः. So there is this conversation that is going on. Just a minute. So this conversation is going on amongst these various persons, and after the discovery of the casket with ornaments, even that is being examined. So Malaiketu says, Mudram Paripalayan. Once again, the seal of Rakshasa is there even on this casket. And then Bhagarayana says that even this casket has the seal of Rakshasa. And then Malaiketu thinks that this letter is very important, and he ensures that the casket is opened with the same care as the letter is opened, so that the seal is not affected, because this will be very useful in conducting further inquiry against Rakshasa with all proper and due evidence. And when the casket is opened, Malaiketu is able to recognize that these were the ornaments that were given to Rakshasa by Malaiketu himself. So removing them from his own person. And he knows for sure now that the letter is addressed to Chandragupta. And he tells Bhagarayana to find out more about this. And then Bhagarayana orders his assistant to beat this fellow again, so that more details will come out from his mouth. And then when beaten, Siddharthaka says that he will reveal things to Kumara, that is Malaiketu himself. So he is now brought to the presence of Malaiketu. Siddharthaka falls at the feet of Malaiketu and begs of him to give him abhaya. And Malaiketu says, I know you are a dependent person, and freedom from fear is granted. So Siddharthaka says, I have been sent to Chandragupta. I am being sent to Chandragupta along with this letter. So I was sent by Rakshasa himself. And Malaiketu says, I want to listen to the Vachika, or the message. And Siddharthaka says that here are five friends, five kings who have become close friends, Pancha Rajanaha. So you have already come across the same set of persons in the very opening act. Chitravarman, king of Kuluta, and then Simhanada, king of Malaya, Pushkaraksha, king of Kashmira, Sindhushena, king of Sindhuraja, and Meghanada, who is a Parsika. And of these, three persons aspire for the kingdom that Malaiketu may win after the conquest of Chandragupta and Chanakya combined. And the other two, respectively, the treasury and the elephant force. And therefore, you have sent Chanakya away, and that way you have pleased me, and therefore now even these desires of these kings must be fulfilled. This is the oral message that has been sent. And Malaiketu in his Swagata is really shocked that Chitravarma and others are indeed acting doing an act of treachery. And he also is not surprised that these are the very kings with whom Rakshasa has a very good friendship and they have a lot of regard for Rakshasa. And therefore, uh, he summons for Rakshasa himself to conduct a proper investigation. And he asks Vijaya, the assistant, to summon Rakshasa. Then enters Rakshasa. The scene shifts and Rakshasa's place is shown. And Rakshasa is worried. He knows that all of his own force is in a way occupied by uh, the persons who are loyal to Chandragupta. And therefore, our army, Asmad Balam, Apurnam Chandragupta Balai. So it is filled all over with the forces that are partial to Chandragupta. And therefore, I have no tranquility of mind. And he says, Priyamadaka, so please tell all the kings who are to follow the prince Kumara Malaiketu that day by day Kusumapura is fast approaching Pataliputra. You are approaching Pataliputra, and therefore you must have a proper assignment known to you all. So, what is the kind of assignment they have been given? They have all been given allocations. There are 4 locations. So, some people have to go in the front leading the army, some in the middle, some behind, and some uh, in close coverage. So, for the prince Malayaketu. So the kings Khasa and Magadha, so they have to lead in the front in the battle, and then Rakshasa will also be there, of course, and then the Gandhara kings along with the Yavana kings, so they have to be in the middle, and then in the rear of the army will be the Shaka kings along with the kings from China and the Huna kings, and the rest, Kauluta and others. So they would ensure the safety of Malaiketu, closely covering him. So this is the assignment that has been given to the various kings, and Priyamadaka receives this message and goes away. But when the Pratihari or the portress comes and says that the prince wants to meet Rakshasa, and Rakshasa says, just a minute, I'll come now. And therefore, Rakshasa says, um, tell Shakatadasa that we have been presented ornaments by Kumara, by Malaiketu, and therefore it's not proper for us to go and visit him without any ornaments on. And so I will take those alankaras with me. I'll put them on and go. And therefore, out of the 3 alankaras which have been purchased, so bring one. And the Purusha, the servant, goes and brings the ornament, and the Rakshasa now proceeds towards where Malaiketu is. And even while he is going, the Rakshasa is really worried, and he says, Adhikarapadam nama nirdoshasya purushasya mahadashanka sthanam. So, any person holding high office is always worried because even if he is not at fault, there are things that are suspected of him quite often, and it creates a great deal of apprehension. There are 2 fears. One from the boss himself, bhayantavat sevyat, by virtue of being a servant. And secondly, the people who are surrounding the king, the Pratyasannas, so he has to be afraid of them also. And number 3 is there are people who are full of envy for a person who is upwardly mobile in his position, and therefore those occupying high positions will really be full of apprehension. So even as he is thinking, these words, Pratihari says, now he has been ushered into the presence of the prince, and uh, Rakshasa now looks at Kumaramali Ketu and says, he looks rather worried. Malay Ketu is full of tension. His sight is fixed towards his own feet, and there is blankness in his eyes, and his face is resting on his hands, and he looks really worried. So he says, Vijayatam Kumaraha, be victorious. And Malaiketu says, Sir, I bow down to you. Please occupy this seat. Rakshasa sits down, and then um, Malaiketu expresses his displeasure right at the outset, saying that in a way he has been made to wait. So for Rakshasa to come over there, and Rakshasa says, well, I was occupied with the distribution of the various allocations and assignments to the various kings, and therefore there was some slight delay. And then Maliketu asks him, okay, what are the plans then that have for the march against the enemy? And Rakshasa gives the details of which kings are to lead in the van of the battle, in the forefront of the battle, who will be in the middle of the army, who the rear, and who again have to be very close to Malaiketu, protecting him well. And then Malaiketu, now already in a state of confusion on account of the letter, he identifies the names of the very kings. So those were the kings who were trying to please Chandragupta, and this at the cost of the life of Raja himself, this Malaiketu himself. So, eva madvinashena Chandraguptam aradhayitum udyataha ta eva mam parivrinanti. They are the ones who are to surround me. Now, Rakshasa says, he asks one more question. This is his Swagata, Malaiketu's Swagata. And aloud he asks, is there anybody being sent to Pataliputra or someone coming from there? So in order to introduce the investigation of Siddharthaka, he is asking this question. Of course, Rakshasa cannot even suspect that the question that is being raised by Malaiketu is leading in that direction. And Rakshasa says innocently, well, what is the point in sending anybody there or anybody coming here? So there is no question of gata gata. And after all, within a few days, we will ourselves be approaching Pataliputra. We will be advancing towards that place just in a matter of a few days. And Malaiketu now thinks, well, I understand. And aloud he says, then why was this person along with this letter sent? And he's pointing towards Siddharthaka, and Rakshasa, after all, knows Siddharthaka so well, and he says, oh, Siddharthaka, what is this? And Siddharthaka, now shedding tears and also acting, being ashamed. He says, sir, I was beaten very much, and therefore I could not hold the secrets. And Rakshasa is puzzled. So, what kind of secret? What for? I'm not able to understand anything, he says. And then Siddharthaka says, well, sir, I told you I was being beaten, and that is why. And even while speaking, so halfway, his face is full of fear, and he stands there, casting his head down. And then Malaiketu says, now he addresses Bhagurayana and says, he is afraid of the boss, and therefore, either on account of that fear or on account of the sense of shame, he is not going to tell anything. So you yourself tell. And Bhagurayana says, he says that you have given this letter, and with an oral message, you have sent him to Chandragupta. And Rakshasa asks Siddharthaka, whom he thought, even now, and he is even now thinking that he is a good friend, is this all true? And Siddharthaka says, once again, betraying his sense of shame, as it were, and well, well, I was beaten to your image, as I told you, and that is why I had to tell like this. And Rakshasa says, this is plain falsehood. And if a person is beaten very much, what will he not tell? You can extract any statement of the person if he is severely beaten. And Malaiketu says, asks Bhagurayana to show him. So the evidence is now being shown one by one. And therefore, he says, show him the lekha, show him the letter, and um, the vachika, the oral message. So that will be revealed now. And then Bhagurayana says, this is the letter. So Rakshasa reads out letter and says, O prince, this is a plot by the enemy. Shatru prayogaha yeshaha. And then Malaiketu, after all, cannot believe his words because there is the abharana alongside. And can this be something devised by the enemy also? And Rakshasa, the moment he sees the avarnas, he says, this was sent to me by your kind self. And on some occasion, when I was pleased with Siddharthaka's service, then I gifted some of these to him. And Bhavarana is now rather upset that what he had given as a gift to Amatya Rakshasa, Amatya Rakshasa has given away to somebody else. So is this proper? So he's very much upset. When you give a gift to somebody with great love and regard, you naturally expect the person to preserve that rather than give it away to some unworthy person. Now here is Siddharthaka who has become suspect in the eyes of so many people, and naturally Bhagurayana or Malaiketu cannot believe that this should be given away by Rakshasa to Siddharthaka. And Malaiketu says, now the letter also says that there is an oral message. And Rakshasa is once again puzzled. What kind of oral message? From whom? To whom? Even the letter is not mine. And then Malaiketu says, okay, what then about this mudra? What about this seal? Rakshasa says, well, counterfeit seals can be manufactured by the cunning people. So Bhagurayana says, what the minister is saying is acceptable. And he asks question to Siddharthaka. So who wrote this letter? And Siddharthaka says, Shakatadasa did. Rakshasa has such a high level of trust with Shakatadasa that he says, if it is written by Shakatadasa, then it is as good as sent by myself, written by myself. And Malaiketu says, get Shakatadasa here. And when the Pratyahar is about to leave, Bhagurayana thinks that Chanakya's spies will never do something which is not pre-planned and not well premeditated. And he says, well, sir, Shakatadasa may or may not accept. In fact, it's very unlikely that he will accept that he has written this letter in front of Amatya. And therefore, rather than summoning him, we can check the sameness of the handwriting with other writings of Shakatadasa. And Malaiketu asked Vijaya to bring some other letter written by the hand of Shakatadasa, and she goes and brings this. And the seal is also summoned, which is also brought. Pratyahari comes with both the letter and the handwriting of Shakatadasa and the seal. And Malaiketu himself examines the two handwritings, and he says there is high resemblance between the two. And Rakshasa himself, in his Swagata, also says, well, the letters resemble. And then but then Shakatadasa is such a dear friend. Now, has Shakatadasa changed? This is the question that now accursed Rakshasa. Could it be that Shakatadasa came to remember this and forgot the other? He has come to remember the fate of his own wife and children and has forgotten his Swami Bhakti or loyalty to the master. And then he has developed lobha regarding one thing and forgotten the other. And his lobha is, his greed is towards the riches that he may now amass and not to the fame, the good name that he could acquire. And therefore, there must be some change of character with Shakatadasa. Otherwise, why would he write a letter like this? And um, these various facts really confuse me. So, um, the seal is the one that was in the hand of, on the fingers of Shakatadasa all the time. And Siddharthaka was a friend of Shakatadasa. And um, this letter is clearly in his own hand. And um, surely Shakatadasa must have entered into a pact with our enemies who are very skillful in plotting against and driving a wedge and are masters of Bheda. And therefore, the one thing that I can conclude from all this is that he wanted to save his own life and therefore has forgotten everything about his loyalty to the master. And then Maliketu refers to the, looks at the three alankaras that have been sent along, and um, he is now puzzled that these must be the ornaments worn by his own father. And then he asks aloud, where from are these ornaments? Rakshasa says, after all, these were purchased. Now, um, all this was done by Chanakya himself. So it was sent to Rakshasa for purchase, and Rakshasa fell into the trap of buying those ornaments. But then now Malaiketu has recognized them to be his father's ornaments. And he asks Vijaya, so as to whether she recognizes those ornaments, and she observes them and full of tears, she says, how can I not remember them? So these were all ornaments that are worn by Parvateshwara, that is Malaiketu's father. And Malaiketu is now so full of sorrow. So he says, these are the ornaments that are fit upon your person. And what has happened now? Now Rakshasa is now puzzled. Oh, all these are the ornaments of his own father, Parvateshwara's. And then he is able to conclude that it is Chanakya who must be behind all this. And he has sent the Vanik Jana, the businessman, so and made us buy this. So all these have been sold by some people to Rakshasa, and he has not really realized that these are the ornaments that were worn earlier by Parvateshwara. And then Malaiketu says in all anger that what Rakshasa is doing is ultimately procuring the ornaments that are worn by Malaiketu's own father, and it is as though he is bartering them with the life of the life of Malaiketu, and therefore you are selling this to, you are selling us to uh, Chandragupta, and um, the price for that is these ornaments. So how cruel you are. And Rakshasa says, how well knit is the plot of our enemy. Now, if I say that this letter is not mine, it's not a proper answer at all, because there is this seal. The seal is there very clearly. And then, should I suspect that Shakata has betrayed us? And how is it to be believed after all? And then the sale of ornaments by Chandragupta here. So who can even imagine this? and therefore it is better just to accept the charges than to give some answer which may look rustic. Now, Malaiketu, even while Rakshasa is thinking on these lines, Sogata, so Malaiketu asks, I'm asking you this question, and yetad Aryam Prichhami. And Rakshasa says, Kumara, ya Aryaha tam Prichha. Ask a person who is noble. So we have become anarya. So it is a sort of a helpless confession. So circumstances have so conspired as to make Rakshasa confess that he is an anarya, a person of ignoble conduct. And Malaiketu is utterly unhappy, and he says that what is it? So what kind of selfishness that drives you to behave in this ignoble manner? So the great amount of anger and frustration in the mind of Malaiketu is very evident. And then Malaiketu continues the interrogation, and he's pointing towards the casket of ornaments and says, "And what is this?" And Rakshasa is now so totally frustrated and in a way bamboozled that he has no answer than saying with tears in his eyes, "Oh, it is all the play of fate, vidhi vilasitam." Because the Nandas who used to rule earlier, they used to treat me as equal to their own children. Putrebhyaha na bhinnaha vayam. They were persons of high intelligence and men of resolute will, and they had a sense of gratitude and so on. And on the other hand, what's happening now is the play of fate which destroys all our efforts, and therefore he is not able to give any proper answer to Malaiketu. And Malaiketu, in all his anger, he says, what is it that you are covering up even now, couching it as Videhe Vyavasitam, that it is all the Vilasita or Vyavasita of fate, the providence is at play here, and not your lobha, your greed. So Malaiketu suspects that Rakshasa is greedy, and his resort to the explanation of fate, the workings of fate, is all unacceptable. So Malaiketu himself now calls Rakshasa Anarya. So there can be no word which can be more cruel or more harsh than the word Anarya. So even in Shakuntalam, we see Shakuntala censuring Dushyanta as Anarya at some point. And then Malaiketu says, it is as though we are being sold like a piece of flesh to the foe. And Rakshasa thinks that this is like a pimple over a boil. I am aparo gandasyo prisphotaha. Then he is not able to hear such words. He says, Shantam papam, naham parvateshware vishakanya prayuktavan. So to this charge of Vishakanya Prayoga, he plainly says that it was not his work. And who then killed my father? Rakshasa once again has only one answer, must ask Vidhi. And naturally, Malaiketu is supremely furious, and he says, for even this, you have to ask only with fate and not Kshapanaka Jiva Siddhi. And Rakshasa is now puzzled the more and says in his Swagata, okay, then even Jiva Siddhi is Chanakya's spy. Katham Jiva Siddhirapi Chanakya Pranidhihi. So it is tantamount to saying that even the heart of Rakshasa is held captive by the enemies. Ripubhirme hridayapi swikatam. And Malaiketu, in his supreme rage, orders Bhasuraka to go and tell Shikharasena, the commander-in-chief, namely that in collusion with Rakshasa, these kings have been uh, acting out an act of treason. And uh, these five kings are Kauluta, Chitravarma. So, and then Malaya king Simhanada, and Kashmira king Pushkaraksha, Sindhu king Sindhushena, and the Parasika king Meghanada. And of these, the first three are aspiring to obtain my lands, and therefore they must be punished. So, um, dig a deep pit and bury them all alive in that pit. And the other two, so they want my treasury and my elephant force, and they must be trampled upon by an elephant and killed. And the Purusha, the servant, goes away with taking those commands, and Malaiketu is all fury at Rakshasa, and he says, Rakshasa, Rakshasa, Naham Vishrambhagati Rakshasa, Malaiketu Kalvaham. So I am a Rakshasa uh, who murders those who confide in him. Actually speaking, this is what has happened. Uh, all these five kings also trusted Malaiketu, and Malaiketu had trusted them, but then all because of the mischief of the letter, utter confusion is sown in the mind of Malaiketu, and he believes that they were all acting in a treacherous manner in collusion with Rakshasa, and therefore he has only ordered the killing of all the five leading kings. And so it is with their help that he could think of succeeding in the battle against Chandragupta and Chanakya, but that is not to be now. And okay, you go and take shelter under Chandragupta. So Samashitam Sarvatmana Chandragupta. And he says, I am able to combat this Chanakya and Chandragupta combined, and yourself now is joining them. It is like the Durnaya destroying Trivarga. So there are three people who are combining here. It is Chanakya and Rakshasa and Chandragupta. And the comparison that is given is that an evil conduct, Durnaya, is something that can destroy Trivarga, namely the set of three, namely Dharma, Artha, and Kama. And therefore, just as evil conduct destroys Dharma, Artha, and Kama, even so, I will destroy this combination of Vishnugupta and Chandragupta and this Rakshasa. The comparison in a way is ironic because whereas Dharma, Artha, and Kama are all desirable pursuits, valid pursuit for man, Durnaya is something, evil conduct is something that is very destructive of all that is good. And he compares himself to Durnaya, and the three to the combination of Dharma, Artha, and Kama. And then Bhagarayana advises Malaiketu, saying that it's now getting late and we must get ready attacking Pataliputra. So the king agrees and they all leave, and Rakshasa is now left on the stage alone, brooding over his own fate. And he says, what a great loss that all these have been killed. That is, Chitravarma and others. Poor fellows, they have all been killed on account of this confusion, this confused. And ultimately, whatever I am doing is ending up in the destruction of my own friends and not the destruction of the enemy. Katham suhrid vinashaya rakshasas cheshtate na ripu vinashaya. So instead of ripu vinasha, what I am doing, whatever I am doing, is turning out to be towards the end of suhrid vinasha, destruction of my own friends. And now that he is forsaken by Malaiketu, he has asked him to please go and join Chandragupta, which is to say that he has been disempowered now, and now he is not able to decide what he must do, what course of action is open to him. King Gachami Taporam, shall I go to a Tapovana, a penance grove, And he says, well, howsoever much tapas I may do, my mind is so full of envy, cannot get tranquility there in the Povana, because he wanted to fight furiously against Chandragupta and Chanakya, and the anger, the wrath of the Navanandas being destroyed by Chandragupta and Chanakya combined is something that is burning in his mind, and therefore it's not possible for him to go to Tapovana and do tapas. And um, shall I end my life? There is another choice that comes to his mind. Okay, this is something that women folk do when their husbands die. So some women end their life being unable to live separated from their husband, and therefore this is something that befits only women. And the third option that he thinks of is, okay, shall I just go and attack my foes? So along in with my sword that he still has in his hand. So kimva khadga sakaha patam yeribale. Ultimately, it amounts to nothing, because it's only when he is in this army and leading the army that there is something that can be done. All alone, what will he do and what can he achieve? And the only thing that he thinks is possible to do is, or that he must do, is that somehow see that Chandana Dasa is not put to death. So at least that is the only thing that I must do now, and I have no other resort. So with this ends the fifth act. So we have just two more acts, and the sixth act is a sort of a short one. It is um, full of the monologue of Rakshasa, and how Rakshasa finally decides to get to know how and where Chandana Dasa is going to be hanged, and he tries to rush towards that place, trying to save. So this is the theme of the sixth act. The sixth act begins with a praveshaka in which two persons are speaking. The two persons speaking are Siddharthaka and Samidharthaka. So the whole conversation is, as it were, in praise of Chanakya's Niti. Siddharthaka says, for a long time I have not met my friend Samidharthaka, and so he is trying to go and meet Samidharthaka. So he has been away for a long time, and now he has come back, and therefore he wants to visit Samidharthaka. And while he is moving in the direction, he sees Samidharthaka himself coming. So the two hold a very interesting conversation, and Siddharthaka, Samidharthaka thinks that after all, Siddharthaka is coming from the camp of Malaiketu, and I must get to know what he is saying. So here is Siddharthaka, and Siddharthaka says, "Oh, Samidharthaka." Samidharthaka says, I am not happy. So Siddharthaka is inquiring of him, how is he doing? And Samidharthaka says, I am no happy man at all, because you have come back to our place and you have not visited me yet. And Siddharthaka says, well, I was coming to your house, but then the moment Chanakya saw me, he gave me one command, namely, O Siddharthaka, go and tell this important news to King Chandragupta. And then I went to Chandragupta and revealed all the developments to him, and I was favored by him. And the very next thing that I was doing was trying to come and meet you. So I was moving towards your very house. And then Samidharthaka says, okay, if it can be heard, can you please tell me what is it? What news was it that you went and told Chandragupta? And Siddharthaka says, what is there that you should not hear? Look, Malaiketu, the wretched Malaiketu, was completely misled on account of the wisdom of Chanakya, the policy of Chanakya. Chanakya Niti Mohita Mati Malaiketu has become. And as a consequence, what did he do? He disempowered Rakshasa. So in the third act, we saw how there was a rift between Chandragupta and Chanakya, which was all pretended. And Rakshasa tried to take advantage out of that. And here is a situation where Malaiketu is dismissing Rakshasa on account of the plot of Chanakya. And then the kings, Chitravarma and others, 5 kings, they have all been killed by Malaiketu himself. And all the other kings, so they saw that this Malaiketu is asamikshikari and durachara. He is not a person who has good discretion, and he is a person of evil conduct. And therefore, many other kings who were to have sided with Malaiketu in this affair, so they now ran for their own safety, and therefore they took all their army along with themselves and returned to their own kingdoms. And the various feudatory kings of Malaiketu, they were all crestfallen. And then what happened was that rather than any great warfare taking place, these 8+ persons, namely Bhadrabhata, Purushadatta, Dingarata, Balagupta, Rajasena, Bhagurayana, Rohitaksha, Vijayavarma, and others, all these are spies of Chandragupta. All were in the camp of Malaiketu. And these persons just arrested Malaiketu, and they have brought him. And therefore, Malaiketu has been captured without an open warfare at all. And Samidhartaka says, well, what heard about kings Bhadrabhata and others, so they had all gotten disaffected with Chandragupta, and they were unhappy with Chandragupta, and therefore they have all gone to Malaiketu. What is this? This is like a badly written play. So in the beginning you hear something, and towards the end of the play you get to know something totally opposite. And therefore, what is it that is happening? And Siddharthaka says, Yasya Daivagatyaiva Ashrutagatyai Namaha Arya Chanakya Nityai. All salutation to Chanakya's Niti, because it is exactly like fate, and you do not know what turns it takes. So it is so unpredictable. So there is no ordinary mind can penetrate what is in the mind of Chanakya and what steps he takes and what for. So that is simply impenetrable. And then the entire Mlecha Bala has been now fully taken control of, and Samidhartaka says, where has all this happened? And Siddharthaka says, well, where the elephants and the horses, so they are all grunting and rushing on. So it has all happened there. And then Samidhartaka says, now, right in the presence of all, Chanakya had resigned from Chandragupta's ministry, and is it now the case then that Chanakya has become once again the minister? Bhartaka says, well, you are an utter simpleton, ati mugdhosi, because Chanakya's mind is something that has not been penetrated by even Amatya Rakshasa. Amatya Rakshasenapi Anavagata Purvam Ari Chanakya Chalitam. And you want to understand and comprehend all that. Siddharthaka says, where is Amatya Rakshasa now? Siddharthaka says that when he is now so full of fear, so because he is totally forsaken by Malaiketu, he has come out from the camp of Malaiketu. But all the same, one person by name Udumbara, who is a spy of Chanakya, is constantly following wherever he goes. And now the information is that Rakshasa has come to Pataliputra. So this has also been communicated to Arya Chanakya. And then Siddharthaka says, well, Amatya Rakshasa had resolved to restore the Nanda kingdom. And without accomplishing that, he has entered into Pataliputra. Siddharthaka guesses and says, well, my logic is that it is his loyalty to Chandanadasa that brings him here. And Siddharthaka says, in that case, then Chandanadasa, I think, will shortly be set free. Siddharthaka says, poor fellow, so how will he get free? Now, remember, so myself, yourself and myself, we have been commanded by Arya Chanakya to take Chandanadasa to the place of execution, Vadhyasthana, and execute Chandanadasa. And Samviddhaka is so full of anger, says, didn't Arya Chanakya find no other person to be executioners? So that he has selected us to do this kind of a task. And Siddharthaka says, if anybody wants to live in this world, it's best to listen to what Chanakya says. So not even think of going counter to what Chanakya says. So, and he says, okay, get ready. So we shall wear the dress of Chandalas. So Chandala Veshadharinau Bhutva Chandanadasan Vadhyasthanam Nayamaha. So it's our task now to take Chandanadasa to Vadhyasthana. So there ends the Praveshaka, the interlude before the sixth act. And as I told earlier, the sixth act is full of monologue of Chasa. So how he is, as it were, between life and death. He wants to die but cannot, and he cannot live either. And we see after the conclusion of the Praveshika, an entry of a person with a rope in his hand. And he says, this Chanakya Niti Rajju, that is, the rope in the form of Chanakya's Niti is indeed extraordinary, because whereas all other ropes are made of, Trigunas, so this is Shadguna Sanyoga Dridha. This is in the concept of Shadguni, or the six forms of expediency in Arthashastra. These are all technical terms. And the end of the noose of this rope has the various upayas, and therefore this is a special type of rope that nobody can escape. And this fellow has now been assigned the task of keeping a tab on what Rakshasa is doing. And he has been following this Rakshasa, and as indicated by Udumbara, this Rakshasa has now come to a garden there. So, and Amatya Rakshasa is coming, as it were, with a Shirshava Guntana, something to cover his head. Not our the hijab controversy that is going on. So, covering his head, he is coming this way. And then Rakshasa enters with his sword in hand that he had spoken of towards the end of the previous act. And Rakshasa is, in a way, bemoaning his fate. And this is the time when he is made thoroughly lonely, that he is looking back on his own life, what has happened, and what's happening now, and so on. He says, Rajalakshmi has deserted the Nandas, and then even the citizens became averse to them, and then the persons who were the most trusted and upon whom important responsibilities were resting, they have also abandoned their responsibilities. And therefore, it is like the situation is like the various limbs deprived of the head. It's only when the head is there that all other limbs can function. And if bereft of the head, all the limbs can do ultimately nothing at all. And royal glory or Rajalakshmi so has abandoned King Nanda and others, and then she has gone to the Vrishala king, that is uh, Chandragupta, and fate has consistently been acting against me. So when every effort of Rakshasa has become a failure, uh, it is nothing but fate. And he says, I first used to serve Nanda um, with great zeal, and then after his departure, I was serving Parvataka, and when Parvataka was gone, so I have been serving Malayaketu, and yet this fate is something that is all set against this Nanda family. Daivam hi Nanda kula shatruhu, asau na vipraha. So there's no point in blaming Chanakya. It is rather the fate that is totally against the Nanda family. And he bemoans the lack of discrimination of Malayaketu. Aho vivekashunyatam mlechasya. This mlecha, namely Malayaketu, is indeed vivekashunya. So he lacks a sense of discrimination. And um, he is doing acts that are ultimately detrimental to him. And therefore, he concludes that when a person's fate is unfavorable, his own intellect becomes utterly deluded and he becomes disillusioned. So, Daive nopahatasya buddhirathava sarva viparyasyati. And he says, in my case, I think this should be happening, that I may die on account of he says that idanimapi tavat ratihastagato vinashyet natu rakshasah chandraguptena saha sandhita. This rakshasa would rather die rather than do any sandhi or sandhana with Chandragupta. It's better that I die as a person who did not keep his promise rather than a person who has been defeated by the craft of the enemy. And he enters the garden there, so it is all dilapidated, and gives a description of the garden, saying that this is the place where the Nandas used to shoot moving targets, and these now abandoned and forsaken. They enkindle my sorrow regarding this place. And he also notices the changes that have taken place after the exit of the Nandas, and the dilapidated building, the dilapidated garden, even the condition of the trees there, phalairhina, vrikshaha, etc. And the trees which are in a state of neglect and therefore they are about to die, as it were. All these things on account of the immensity and intensity of the sorrow that is there in his mind. And he says, Malayakita Sanyamana Sanjataha Rajakulasya or Mauryakulasya Adhika Paritosham Pishanait. Just then he hears the noise of Pataha shanka and other various instruments. And he is a bit puzzled, and he wants to find out what it is. And he gets to know that because Malaiketu has now been arrested, um, the Maurya family is so full of joy, and it's only um, inspires tears in his eyes, and he says, Shravitosmi Shriyam Shatro Rabhinecha Darshitaha Anubhavaitum Manye Yatna Samprati Mam Vidhehe. Uh, my enemy becoming um, getting the royal glory that I had heard earlier, and that was demonstrated in front of me. And I think fate has willed to make me go through all that, so to make me experience that. So now, saying all those words, he sits on a stone slab there, and the Purusha who has been employed to observe him, mm, he says, okay, now this Amatya has sat down now, and now I will do what Chanakya asked me to do. And what this fellow does is, pretending not to have seen Rakshasa at all, almost in front of Rakshasa, he ties the rope around his own neck and is about to hang himself. And Rakshasa looks at him and says, how is it this person is trying to kill himself? Probably he's also as full of sorrow as I am. And let me go and ask. And he goes to him and says, what is it you're doing, man? And the Purusha says, see, I am full of sorrow on account of the destruction of my own friend, and therefore, what else can a poor person like me do? And Rakshasa says, well, uh, exactly as I thought earlier, this fellow is also in an unfortunate condition, and says, hey, Vyasana Brahmacharin, a fellow in sorrow, if it is not a secret and not very difficult and painful to tell, can you please tell what it is? And the fellow says, this Purusha says, so it's neither a secret nor is it painful to tell, but um, I do not like to delay my death because my heart is so full of sorrow on account of the death of my friend. And the Rakshasa says, oh, it is as it were, I am myself being repudiated by this person because I too know that Chandanadasa is about to die and I am indifferent as it were. And therefore, he again requests the fellow to tell him in detail what exactly is happening. And then the Purusha says, well, now that you are asking so much, okay, let me tell you. There is one person by the name Vishnudana, who is an excellent jeweler banker. And Rakshasa knows of Vishnudasa because he is a very intimate friend of Chandanadasa. So in his Swagata, he says that, well, Chandanadasa's good friend is Vishnudasa. And what of him? He asks. This Purusha, this man says, he is my dear friend. And then Rakshasa is now full of joy because he can now get to know something from this fellow about the whereabouts of Chandanadasa, etc. So because the relationship is so close, and then he will know something about Chandanadasa. And then the Purusha continues and he says, this person, Vishnudasa, has given away all his riches and ornaments and wants to end his life by entering into fire, and he has gone out to the city. And before I hear of his death, I want to end my life by hanging. And that is why I have come to this abandoned garden. And then Rakshasa asks, what is the reason for your friend entering into fire? Is it that he is affected by some illnesses that cannot be cured by doctors? No, sir. And then has he been exiled by or persecuted by the king in a moment of anger? And the Purusha says, Chandraguptasya janapade na nrishamsa paripattihi. There is no such wicked act in the kingdom of Chandragupta. And then, is this fellow in love with some woman whom he can never get? And the Purusha says, Shantam papam. So, this person can never be a person of such an act of immodesty. And then, um, is it then that his death is unavoidable? And then Arya Purusha says, yes, sir. And Rakshasa is now thinking within himself, now that he is a close friend of Chandanadasa, well, I must do something. Now, how all this leads to his rushing towards saving Chandanadasa, and ultimately how Chanakya makes use of that to ensure that Rakshasa comes over to the side of Chandragupta is the theme of the remaining portion of the play, which we hope to cover in one or maximum two talks. Okay. Namaskar, everybody. I think Hari Ganesh was saying that next week there is some other program, and therefore we may have to meet the week after. Namaskar.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for the wonderful lecture. Next week, on next Saturday, we are planning to organize our Shikotsam, that is the annual day. As you all know, our Samiti was established around 4 years back. So we'll be sending you the invitation through email within few days. So I request you all to attend next week's Vashikotsam event. So it is on Saturday, that is 26th, and the timings is 6:30 to 8 o'clock. The event timings. Thank you very much. Now I'll announce the close of the session. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.